Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. This is going to be a real change of topic because I'm going to be talking to you about the biggest market failure the world has ever seen. And now I'm going to have to explain why I'm using that sort of language. So my talk is really going to explain why it is that we all need to focus on this business of the transition from an economy that has been developed since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution based on fossil fuels to a fossil fuel-free economy. And so I'm just going to start with this little reminder. This is some fairly recent data, May this year, for the overall change in the average temperature for the whole planet from the year 1880 to the present time. And the only change in the coloring from blue to red is because there's a random choice of the zero line. But what you'll see is that the temperature rise to the present day is over 1 degree since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the scientific community fully understands this, made predictions, and the predictions really were made way back here when the future didn't look quite so clear. And I can tell you that the predictive modeling has produced this transformation that you see here. I don't think I have a pointer. This transformation up here was predicted way back in the 1990s. Of course, what you also see is a lot of noise on the data line. The noise is what we call weather, and the transformation that is happening, the baseline transformation, is climate change. That's what we're talking about in terms of global warming. But of course, accompanying this, and you will see that at the present time, we're at a peak in global temperatures. That is an El Nino-related event, so we can expect this to come down, but the overall trend is going to continue, I'm afraid, well into the middle of this century, and unless we change our behavior radically, it will only change because of the destruction of the global economy that follows from the consequences of not only this very high temperature, but the rising sea levels. So sea levels have already risen to the point where that big flood in Britain in 2013-14, that winter flood, already has the signature of climate change on it, because sea level rise means when there are storms at sea, the water incursion is further inland. So what we're already seeing is the dangers of climate change, and in many places we're seeing the attempts to try and manage that. Now, of course, the big meeting in Paris in December last year has made a big transformation, because we've got over 190 countries agreeing to take action on this transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a fossil fuel-free one. So what I'm emphasizing here is the importance of this transition and the short timeline that we have in order to manage this. If we just add up all of the contributions from China in yellow, from India, USA, EU, etc., that were promised in Paris, and they only promised up till 2030. Britain is rather unique in having a commitment out to 2050. If we add them all up, you'll see the trajectory still doesn't look very promising in terms of greenhouse gas emissions on the vertical axis and along the horizontal axis, 2010 to 2100. If we assume after 2030 that there's a deeper transition away from fossil fuels and deforestation, we might be on this yellow curve here. What does that mean in terms of global temperature rise? Just by the end of the century, that is a 3 to 4 degree centigrade transition. And frankly, that is not a livable world. So what we need is to look at these rather sharper alternatives. This would be a 1.5 degree transition, meaning net zero emissions. Look at this, net zero emissions by 2035, or with a 50% chance of hitting 2 degrees, which the global community agreed would be the maximum, 50% chance in blue, and in red, you've got a 66% chance of reaching no more than 2 degrees. So we're not on a very good trajectory, But nevertheless, what I feel optimistic about is the nationally determined contributions means that the marketplace for all of the energy systems that deliver into the new low-carbon economy is going to suddenly increase. And it's that commercial opportunity that I think is going to drive this transition faster than indicated by the promises of the nations. Those promises are basically rather conservative. This is another version of the same behavior. Let me say, this has been analyzed and reanalyzed many times. But what I do want to emphasize is everyone has agreed that the 3 to 4 degrees centigrade pathway, which is essentially what was agreed in Paris in terms of the nationally determined contributions being added together, is nothing like the 2 to 1.5 degree pathway that we need to be on and that we agreed to be on. So an accelerated transition is what we actually demand as we go forward in time. I'm just going to go back because this particular curve I like because it separates land use change away from all of the energy transitions required. And you'll see right at the top in blue, land use change is almost as critical a parameter as the size of the Chinese and US emissions together. Sorry, not together, but separately. Now, what the land use change is continued deforestation. And the opportunity there is to switch deforestation into reforestation. That's the British government position. We're putting $2 billion into this, working with Norway and Germany on a massive reforestation program. What we intend, and I think we can deliver, is that by 2030, not only will we have stopped all deforestation, we will have reforested an area the size of India, and that will give us a new carbon dioxide sink equal to all the emissions from the US today. That's how we get to net zero emissions. All right, so I just say, what are the co-benefits of this transition to the global economy? Health, first and foremost. Yes, we're faced with these massive heat waves. Remember the heat wave in Europe in 2003 when in excess of 50,000 people died, mainly in France. Those heat waves, of course, are going to become more severe and more challenging as we move forward in time. But air quality, anyone who's been to Beijing, been to Shanghai, will know what I'm talking about with air quality, and even worse, Delhi. These are cities that are being destroyed, health of the people destroyed by the very air that they're having to breathe. We all know the fossil fuels are far from a clean mechanism. Agricultural productivity, we need to increase soil carbon content to increase agricultural productivity. And there's a massive contribution from the increase of soil carbon content, the reintroduction of living matter into farm soils, and the productivity of those farms. That's already a proven factor. Now here's the big and promising factor in terms of commercial reality of this whole project. What I'm just showing you here is on the vertical scale the cost of every one of these different factors indexed to 100 in the year 2008. Going forward in time, you'll see in yellow that light-emitting diodes are the leading parameters since 2008. Overall, since 1989, when Germany first introduced feed-in tariffs to encourage this marketplace for solar and wind energy, the cost reduction has been in those more like a factor of 10 to 20. So we're seeing the learning curve rolling out these new technologies into the marketplace, and the price keeps coming down as the market volume increases. And so this includes modeled battery cost, utility scale photovoltaics, distributed photovoltaics, and land-based wind. Britain is still effectively using feed-in tariffs to get the right mix of energy on the grid to produce that reduction we're committed to of 80% by 2050 in greenhouse gas emissions. And what that means is that we anticipate that offshore wind turbine prices will continue to come down as the marketplace increases, and there's an enormous global market out there. The new low-carbon energy sector in the UK is not a small player. If you add it all together, which is what the Office of National Statistics does, you get the sort of figures that are shown here. Sometimes the figures look more optimistic. I think this is the direct economy. Some figures show in excess of £100 billion a year in turnover. I think that includes the financial sector in the city. The point I'm making here is that this is good for the economy. This is a high employment sector, and in Britain at the moment we need high employment sectors to keep unemployment levels down. But of course the rollout of this sector, which is the theme of Emma's presentation, into the global sector is enormously important. And many of these British companies are now big players abroad, and it's that sector that is going to produce the wealth creation opportunity that Emma was referring to. I have put this slide in specifically to refer to the importance of the rollout of smart grids. The government would like to see every home in Britain with a smart grid by 2020. And of course what the smart grid is doing is contributing to this business of allying energy production capacity to energy demand. We all know that wind turbines don't produce energy all the time. Sometimes even in the North Sea, the wind doesn't blow. And the sun doesn't shine every night. So we need to manage demand as we manage the supply system, switching to intermittent energy sources. The way to do that is partly through smart grids, it's partly through smart meters, and it's partly through energy storage capacity. What we need is all of the above, and once we get to market-facing solutions which are commercial, which are cheap, then we're going to roll this out around the world very quickly. And that's why I have a sense of optimism about managing what looks like an incredibly difficult problem. It's the commercial opportunity that is going to turn this whole thing around. Who is going to continue to mine coal if there is an alternative to put renewable energy onto the grid more cheaply than continuing to burn coal? And between the tropics today, with these falls in prices that I've just noted, we're already at the point where it's competitive, even for a country where the electricity is on the grid, to install renewable energy rather than to install new fossil fuel energy. That's why in 2013, according to the IEA, we already passed the point of more than 50% of all new primary energy installation being from renewable energy. Right? So it's already outstripping new investment into fossil fuel-based power systems. And that's not driven by legislation. That's driven by legislation in Europe, the feed-in tariffs, but the rollout into the rest of the world is happening on the commercial basis, even without a carbon price. I've been misinterpreted, and because I'm on camera, I don't want to be here. I'm not against a carbon price. I'm simply saying that even without a carbon price, the rollout is happening. The carbon price is a very good mechanism for speeding up the rollout. All right, so let me just say, these smart grids, smart meters, critical part of the pathway into this new sector we're talking about. But we haven't got enough of the research capacity currently in place to see that we yield all of the technologies required to reach 100% renewable energy, or let me say renewable plus nuclear energy for all countries in the world, which is what we have to achieve in a relatively short space of time. So a group of us, and Adair Turner is a member of this group, about 4 years ago, a bit more than 4 years ago, began talking about what became known as the Global Apollo Program, which we launched in June last year. And the Global Apollo Program simply invited countries to join the program to spend more on clean, publicly funded money on clean energy, research, development and demonstration in order to de-risk the new technologies for the private sector to take into the marketplace. And so this venture was launched at the Royal Society in Britain. We made the smart move of getting David Attenborough there. And David Attenborough, it turns out, had just been invited to the White House to be interviewed by President Obama. And David Attenborough then said to President Obama, before he was interviewed by Obama, I'm going to ask you if you will join this program. And so it's on that interview that Obama first commits himself to this program. So this happened in July, August last year, and by November the 30th, we had this happening. 22 heads of government lined up below what is called now Mission Innovation. Prime Minister Modi was the most enthusiastic Prime Minister that I met on my journeys around the world to put this together. But Modi did not like the name Apollo, and he came up with the Mission Innovation phrase. Now, that was the first day of the COP meeting, and I believe it had a big impact on the outcome of the COP meeting. We've got 22 nations, plus now the European Union agreeing to back this, which means that currently those nations are spending $15 billion a year into clean energy, publicly funded RD&D, and they have promised in joining that they will raise it to a total of $30 billion a year by 2020. So there's the sum total of what I think is a clear pathway into the future. We've got this big public investment into the research with a potentially important outcome, and that was recognized by a man who will be well known to you, Bill Gates, who contacted us and said, I think the Global Apollo program is a good idea. He did criticize many aspects of it, but he said it's a good idea, and I'm going to put $1 billion of my own money down to invest in the new technologies that emerge. And he emphasized, this is not philanthropic funding. This is my private money, and I'm expecting to make it profitable. So he then arrives in Paris with 28 co-signatories to the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, which is 28 wealthy individuals making a similar commitment. So we've got a total of perhaps $20 billion, effectively venture capital funds waiting to fund the new ideas that emerge from the Mission Innovation Program. If I was starting out my career as a research scientist, I was for 45 years a research scientist, this would be Christmas times 100. You've got double the research money, and there's all this private sector money waiting in the wings to fund it. What is very important to say is 2 of the wealthy individuals are British, and 2 are African, 2 are Indian, 2 are Chinese. Gates was very careful to see that he did spread this around the world so that each of these countries is believing that they are going to be creating wealth out of this operation for their own country. For example, Modi's enthusiasm is not only driven by the fact that he is committing his country to build 175 gigawatts of new solar energy by 2022. Minister Goyal is a minister with a tremendous mission and a passion to deliver. Not only is he enthusiastic for that reason, but he can also see, as the demand for energy storage technologies rolls out, it's Tata that may be the winning company in the private sector. Right? So it's a win-win situation for all sides in this. After this, I, in the excitement, wrote an op-ed for magazine Science, and the editor put this heading on, biggest opportunity of our age. What he's talking about is the biggest risk of our age, which I've talked to you about, climate change. But I'm also saying the energy marketplace, and this has been said by Sasha before, is the single biggest marketplace in the world. If you think IT is big, the total energy marketplace for the new clean energy sector rollout is going to be $3 to $6 trillion a year by 2020. The International Energy Agency estimates that by 2035, this sector will have spent, between now and 2035, $53 trillion. on this rollout of clean energy. It's a massive new wealth-creating opportunity. Here are two ideas I'm going to leave you with that provide, I think, a bit of food for thought. How do we store energy apart from lithium-ion batteries? And we all know the success of the flat wall battery systems that we can hang in our homes. Those flat wall battery systems, $3,000, amazing. You can buy 9 kilowatt hours, which for a relatively small household with solar on the rooftop will see you round the day. That's quite a good storage system and not bad price. This is looking at the other end of the spectrum. This is a way of storing a gigawatt hour, right? 1 billion watt hours. And how do you do it? Well, it's back to up-pumped water storage, right? So instead of pumping water up a mountainside, what Professor Heindel, a mining engineer from Germany, and he set up a company and is building this, is doing here is taking a piece of flat land with granite below it, that's a very common occurrence, and mining out a cylinder of granite below the earth. That cylinder is 150 meters diameter, 250 meters deep, and as I say, stores a gigawatt hour of energy by simply pumping water up to make it go up, and then you release the weight to drive the water through a turbine situated on the right-hand side when you need electricity. In other words, you can use the technology of up-pumped water storage even when you don't have a 2,000-foot mountain nearby. Britain is currently, as I'm sure you know, putting the world's longest underwater link through to Norway. Why are we going through to Norway? Norway becomes one of our energy storage sectors because they've got high mountains and an excess of water sitting up there that can be used effectively to store energy for the UK. But if we had, these are not much bigger than a football pitch. Obviously, you would have to give the farmer a little bit of warning before. But nevertheless, they're not very big. It's a bit like those gas storage meters. And we'd need perhaps 100, 200 in Britain to really offset the problem of intermittency on our energy system and the problems getting worse as we increase the amount of renewables. Transformational, I would suggest, and that's the point. These are disruptive technologies that once they've proven are going to spread around the world very rapidly. I show you one more. This is my favorite, and this is a British company. A company called Varialift is building this. Do go to their website. This is a Photoshop, but it's becoming closer and closer to a reality as we speak here. What you see there is the first airship that has grasped the nettle of putting an aluminium frame around the helium balloons inside. And what this means is, in particular, that it doesn't change shape as you release helium into the balloons. So inside, there are 12 independent airbags. There's a helium cylinder, there's a compressor, and there's a crane. And underneath what you see, this is about 12 stories high. It measures 250 meters long, 75 meters wide. It's enormous. But I'm going to say to you, you only have to land this when you want to fix things, and you might even be able to fix things up in the air. Right, so how do we work? In there, ship's containers, 20 to 30 ship's containers fully loaded, release the helium into the balloons. It'll lift this to 30,000 feet. No energy expended. And at 30,000 feet, you've now picked up tomatoes from a field in Spain. By the way, how did you pick the tomatoes up? You didn't land. There's a container full of tomatoes in the middle of the tomato field. You've simply craned it up into the bottom of the airship. You now have to fly to Britain. No fossil fuel used. These are electric motors. It's covered with solar panels. Because of its sheer size, it's intersecting enough solar energy that it can do 340 kilometers an hour at 30,000 feet. So air resistance is quite low. You arrive at the depot of Sainsbury's and simply lower the container down onto the depot. Right? So you see what I mean. You really have not got to create large airfields to handle these things. You need places to repair them. But this, I think, is massively a breakthrough, because you only have to consider this in Africa alongside the mobile phone. The mobile phone broke through because of the lack of infrastructure on the land. Equally for transport, especially for freight, there's very little infrastructure on the land. You look at India, you look at countries with isolated villages. This is what I would say is a transformative technology. So I'm leaving you with those two examples because I am trying to emphasize the opportunity for breakthrough technologies is enormous. But I'm going to just end with a slight argument. I am sorry that Emma isn't here with her, because if we are too concerned about being customer-facing, we're not going to develop these technologies efficiently into the marketplace. We really have to think about the problems we're trying to tackle. So I'm now going to refer you to Steve Jobs. I've just tweeted a speech that he made some time ago, in which he said, knowing your customer is not how the scientifically driven, technologically driven industry ought to behave. And he points to the difference between his company and the companies like IBM that slowly failed away. And he said, what happened? They appointed CEOs who were simply market-facing, i.e. facing the market as it was today, and unaware of the importance of the new technology that comes through the company. Thank you very much.